My daughter, Sarah, always had a laugh that could brighten the dimmest room. But lately, when she visits, she doesn't laugh anymore. She smiles, a tight, practiced movement of the lips that never reaches her eyes. I sat across from her in her pristine, white-marbled kitchen. It was the kind of kitchen you see in magazines, where everything is expensive and nothing looks used. Her husband, David, is a successful architect. He provides the best of everything. But as I watched Sarah carefully wipe a non-existent smudge off the counter, I saw the bruise. It was small, hidden just under the cuff of her silk blouse, a yellowish-purple shadow on her wrist. "That's a nasty bump, Sarah," I said softly, reaching for her hand. She flinched. It was a small movement, but it felt like a gunshot in the quiet room. She quickly pulled her sleeve down. "I'm just clumsy, Mom. I tripped over the rug in the hallway. David keeps telling me I need to be more careful." David keeps telling me. Those 4 words had become the refrain of her life. The front door opened, and the air in the room changed instantly. It didn't get colder, but it got heavier. David walked in, his suit perfectly tailored, his face wearing that charming, dominant smile that had fooled me for 3 years. "Eleanor, what a pleasant surprise," he said, kissing Sarah on the cheek. He didn't look at her. He looked at the kitchen. "Sarah, darling, did you forget to call the gardener? The hedges look a bit unruly. It reflects poorly on us." "I'll call him tomorrow, David. I was just having tea with Mom," Sarah said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming small and submissive. "Tea is nice," David said, his eyes finally meeting mine. There was a coldness there, a territorial warning. "But Sarah has a lot to do this evening. We're hosting the partners, remember. She needs to be focused." I stayed silent. I had learned that arguing with David only made Sarah's life harder after I left. I watched as he put his hand on her shoulder, not a gesture of affection, but a grip of ownership. As I drove home, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I knew that look. I had seen it in the hospital wards where I worked for 30 years. It wasn't just a bruise on her wrist. It was the slow erasing of my daughter's soul. Sarah would never leave him on her own. She was too scared, too convinced that she was the clumsy one, the forgetful one. David had spent years breaking her down while the world watched them as the perfect couple. I pulled my car over to the side of the road and looked at my phone. I had a photo of that bruise. I had taken it while she was reaching for the teapot. It was the first rule I broke, invading her privacy to document her pain. If I played by the rules, if I waited for her to ask for help, I might be burying her in a year. I realized then that to save her, I would have to become the villain in David's perfect story. I had to start a war he wouldn't see coming until it was too late. The next few days were a blur of cold calculation. I didn't go to Sarah's house with flowers or motherly advice. Instead, I waited until David was at his firm's annual retreat, 3 days where Sarah would be alone, or so he thought. I arrived at their house at 9 a.m. Sarah looked startled to see me. She was wearing a thick sweater, despite the afternoon heat. "Mum, what are you doing here?" David doesn't like unexpected visitors, even when he's away. "He checks the doorbell camera," she whispered, glancing nervously at the small lens mounted near the frame. "I'm not a visitor, Sarah. I'm your mother," I said, stepping inside and pulling a small piece of black tape from my pocket. I covered the camera lens. The Wi-Fi glitched. It happens in this neighborhood all the time. "He'll be angry," she breathed, her hand going to her throat. "Let him be angry at me, not you," I said firmly. I sat her down at the kitchen table. "Sarah, I saw the bruise, and I know about the allowance he gives you. I know you have to ask him for money even for groceries." She looked away, her face flushing, with a mixture of shame and fear. He's protective, Mom. He handles the finances because I'm not good with numbers. You know that." "I know that's what he wants you to think," I replied. While Sarah made tea with trembling hands, I did something I had never done in my life. I went to David's private study. It was a room Sarah was forbidden to enter. It was locked. But David was the kind of man who thought his authority was enough of a lock. I found the spare key hidden inside a hollowed-out book on the hallway shelf. a classic cliché for a man who thought he was smarter than everyone else. Inside, the room smelled of expensive leather and old cigars. I wasn't looking for a smoking gun or a secret weapon. I was looking for the leash. I found it in the bottom drawer of his desk. A thick folder labelled Household Management. Inside weren't just bills, there were logs. Detailed logs of Sarah's mileage on the car, printouts of her text messages, and a legal document I hadn't expected, a post-nuptial agreement Sarah had signed a year ago. I read through the fine print. If Sarah left him for any reason, she would leave with nothing. No alimony, no savings, not even the jewellery he had gifted her. He had legally engineered her poverty. But as I flipped to the back of the folder, I found something else. A series of receipts for a private medical clinic in a different city. They weren't in Sarah's name, they were in David's. He was paying thousands of dollars every month for a specialised treatment he hadn't told anyone about. "Mum, what are you doing in there?" Sarah stood at the door, her face pale with terror. "If he finds out." "He's not going to find out, Sarah," I said, tucking the medical receipts into my waistband. "Because you're going to help me, I need you to give me the login to your shared bank account. Just once." "I can't. He gets an alert for every login," she cried. "Then let him get the alert," I said, looking her in the eyes. "This is the rule we have to break, Sarah. We have to stop being afraid of his alerts. We need to see where that money is really going." That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in a motel under a false name. I spent the night looking at the medical receipts. David wasn't sick. He was paying for reputation management and private settlements for accidental injuries involving a former employee. David didn't just have a temper. He had a history. And Sarah wasn't his first victim. She was just the first one who had stayed. I realized then that a bruise wasn't enough to get her out. David could explain away a bruise, but he couldn't explain away a pattern. I had the first piece of the puzzle, but to win this, I had to find the woman David had paid to stay quiet. I was no longer just a mother. I was an investigator in a war of secrets. Finding the woman from David's receipts wasn't a cinematic moment. It was hours of sitting in my car, drinking lukewarm coffee, and scrolling through old social media posts of David's firm from 5 years ago. I was looking for a face that had suddenly vanished. I found her. Claire. She had been a junior architect, bright-eyed and promising, until she resigned abruptly for personal reasons. No farewell party, no LinkedIn update, just a clean break. I found her living in a small, cramped apartment 3 towns over. When I knocked on her door, she didn't look like an architect. She looked like someone who had spent years trying to forget. "I'm Sarah's mother," I said, before she could close the door. "I've seen the receipts, Claire. I've seen the private settlements." Claire's face went white. She let me in, her hands trembling as she cleared a space on the cluttered table. "I signed an NDA, Elena. If I talk, I lose the house. I lose everything he paid me." "He didn't pay you, Claire. He bought your silence so he could move on to my daughter," I said, my voice thick with a mother's rage. "Sarah has a bruise on her wrist today. Tomorrow it might be her ribs, or worse." Claire sat down, her eyes staring at a point on the wall. "He doesn't hit you at first. He just corrects you. He fixes your clothes, your hair, your thoughts. And when you finally break and shout back, he hits you to calm you down. Then he cries. He makes you feel like the monster." I felt a chill down my spine. It was the exact pattern I was seeing with Sarah. "I need your help, Claire. Not your money, not your house. Just your testimony. Not to the police, not yet, but to his board of directors. He's about to be named senior partner. He cares more about his reputation than his life." "He'll ruin me," she whispered. "Not if we ruin him first," I replied. I left Claire's house with something better than a settlement. I had a copy of the original police report she had filed, and then withdrawn under David's pressure. It was a rule I was breaking, using a victim's trauma to fuel a fire, but I had no choice. I drove back to Sarah's house. David was back. I could see his car in the driveway glowing under the porch lights. I didn't go inside. I sat in the dark, watching the window of their bedroom. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "Mum?" David found the tape on the camera. "He's very upset. Please don't come over for a few days. I'm fine." I knew what "I'm fine" meant. It meant she was hiding in the bathroom. It meant he was outside the door, speaking in that calm, terrifying voice, explaining why she had failed him again. I didn't reply. I called Marcus, David's biggest rival at the firm. It was the ultimate betrayal of family loyalty. But David had stopped being family the moment he touched my daughter. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady, "I have the medical records and a witness from the 2021 incident. I want to know if the board still thinks David is the right face for the company." "Eleanor, why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked, his tone shifting to professional curiosity. "Because I want him fired, Marcus. I want him stripped of his title, his bonus, and his pride. And I want it done by tomorrow morning." I was playing a dangerous game. I was stripping David of everything he loved, knowing that a cornered man is the most violent. But I had to make him weak before I could take Sarah away. If he had nothing left to protect, he would have nothing left to hold over her. The final stand wasn't going to be in a courtroom. It was going to be in that white-marbled kitchen where the perfection would finally shatter. The next morning, the silence in Oakhaven was suffocating. I didn't wait for a phone call. I drove to Sarah's house and walked in through the back door. I didn't knock. I didn't care about the rules of etiquette anymore. David was sitting at the kitchen island, his laptop open, his face a mask of pale fury. Sarah was standing by the stove, her back to him, her shoulders hunched as if waiting for a blow. "The board called me an hour ago, Eleanor," David said, his voice a low, dangerous hiss. He didn't even look up at me. "They've postponed my promotion. They mentioned Claire. They mentioned a police report." "Mum, what did you do?" Sarah turned around, her eyes wide with terror. She had a fresh bandage on her palm. She had slipped again. "I didn't do anything, Sarah. David did this to himself 5 years ago," I said, walking over to her and standing between her and the man she feared. David stood up slowly. He was taller than me, stronger than me. But for the first time he looked small. The architect of perfection was watching his own life crumble. "You think you've won. You've just ruined your daughter's future. Look at this house, Eleanor. Look at her clothes. Who's going to pay for this now? You? On a nurse's salary?" "She doesn't need this house, David. She needs to breathe," I replied. He stepped toward us, his hand tightening into a fist. "Get out of my house, now. Sarah, tell your mother to leave." Sarah didn't speak. She looked at David, then at me, then at the bandage on her hand. The silence stretched until it was unbearable. "I'm not leaving, David," Sarah said. Her voice was thin, shaking, but it was her voice. "And neither is she." David laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "You're nothing without me, Sarah. You're a clumsy, forgetful girl who can't even handle a gardener. You'll be back in a week, begging for a place to stay." I reached into my bag and pulled out the one thing David didn't expect. A bus ticket. Just one. And a folder with a lease agreement for a small apartment near the hospital, in my name. "The post-nup you made her sign. It says she leaves with nothing," I said, sliding the papers across the marble counter. "So, she's leaving with nothing. No jewelry, no designer bags, no car. Just the clothes on her back." "You're insane," David spat. "No," I said. "I'm a mother who knows that a daughter is worth more than marble. Sarah, let's go." David moved to grab Sarah's arm, but I stepped into his path. I didn't hit him. I didn't scream. I just looked him dead in the eye with 30 years of seeing men like him in the ER. "If you touch her, David, I don't need a police report. I'll just call Marcus and tell him where the rest of the unaccounted firm funds are hidden. I saw the spreadsheets in your desk, remember?" It was a bluff. I hadn't found the spreadsheets. But a man who lives a lie always believes someone has found the truth. He froze. The calculated risk had paid off. His greed was finally greater than his need for control. Sarah walked past him. She didn't look back. She didn't take a suitcase. She just grabbed her coat and walked out the door. As I followed her, I heard the sound of glass shattering behind us, David finally breaking something he couldn't fix. We sat in my old beat-up car in the driveway. Sarah was staring at the house, her chest heaving as she finally started to cry, not with fear, but with the sheer exhaustion of being free. I have nothing, Mum, she sobbed. Everything I had. It's all in there. You have your laugh, Sarah, I said, starting the engine, and you have your life. Everything else is just furniture. I broke the rules. I invaded her privacy. I betrayed a family member, and I used a victim's past as a weapon. And as I drove my daughter away from that beautiful, hollow prison, I knew I would do it all over again. Justice isn't always a courtroom. Sometimes, justice is just a mother and a daughter driving away in a car that smells like old coffee, leaving the perfection behind in the rearview mirror.